Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. So this is our question that we are going to explore. What if looking at art is really a way of looking at yourself? So this evening, we're lucky enough to be in this arts club surrounded by artworks. And as you've been moving around the exhibition space, you've been looking at the art, deciding maybe quite quickly whether you like it, if you understand it, if you don't like it, if you don't understand it. And something to consider, what if those reactions that you have to the artworks aren't as straightforward as they seem? What if they are actually about you rather than the artworks? So it might be tempting to think of yourself in this way, as a blank canvas. And this is attractive for several reasons. We might think, I can always have a fresh start, I can create anew, I can design myself according to my wishes. This gives us a sense of autonomy and control. But for Nietzsche, this is the philosopher we'll be engaging with this evening, a German philosopher from the 19th century, he thinks this is a comforting illusion. If you think of yourself as a blank canvas, this is not real. Oops. So how should we think of ourselves then? We're not something that we invent from scratch. We are not this blank canvas. Instead, the self is something, he thinks, that we already find ourselves in, much like a garden. So a garden is precisely what Nietzsche likens the self to. Gardens are not empty. They are full of different things growing, competing forces, things that bloom and flourish, things that choke and take over, unexpected surprises. For Nietzsche, this is what the self is like. We are already full of drives, of instincts, tendencies, experiences, often pulling us in very different directions. So when we think about shaping ourselves, the task is not to create anew. We're not inventing something from scratch. Instead, we need to tend the garden. We need to select, we need to prune, we need to arrange. We need to work with this existing material, and crucially, we need to decide what we want to let grow. Like a garden, the self is never finished. It requires ongoing care and attention. If we neglect it, it becomes overgrown and wild. But if we try to over-control it, it loses something. It becomes sterile and artificial. So just like a garden, the self is something that we need to cultivate carefully. But there's a catch. According to Nietzsche, we don't really know what's in the garden. We don't know ourselves. So he thinks that we don't have transparent access to ourselves. Again, it might be quite comforting to think, I do know myself. I know what I'm like, I know what drives me, I know what my motivations are, I do have self-knowledge. I just need to introspect and I can find out what's going on. But Nietzsche thinks it's not that simple. Much of the self is hidden, some of it is quite unruly, some of it is quite contradictory. So, the question becomes, how can we cultivate this garden if we don't know what's growing there? How do we see what needs cultivating? And one answer is, this is what I want to propose today, is that our encounters with art can actually show us what's growing in this garden, can show us what is actually going on with the self. Why? Well, when we look at artworks, we're not just looking at something that is out there in the world, external to us. we're actually registering something in ourselves. So I want to propose that our reactions to artworks are not random. Feelings of attraction, discomfort, confusion, fascination, those feelings actually tell us what we are made of. They are signals from the self. And they reveal something about what we might desire, what we might resist, what we don't fully understand. So, for example, looking at Prop by Jenny Saville. Maybe you feel disgusted by this painting, this looming body, this mountain of flesh rippling. But at the same time, you can't quite tear your eyes away. So that tension between attraction and repulsion might reveal something about how you relate to bodies. If there's something unresolved in your attitude there, this may even relate to your own body. Looking at Tracey Emin's My Bed, this mess, this chaos. How do you feel when you look at this? Do you feel uncomfortable? Do you feel a bit embarrassed for her? After all, she has truly laid bare her emotional life. Everything is out there. This is not sanitized at all. What does your response tell you? Well, maybe this tells you something about your own threshold for intimacy, for vulnerability. So art doesn't just show us images, it can show us ourselves. By acting as a mirror, art can reflect back parts of the self and give us access to the garden, show us what's actually growing there. We can then decide whether to accept what we find, to reject it, to try and reshape it. So before we get into how art helps us curate the self, since Nietzsche likens the self to a garden, I just want to take some time to unpack this parallel between gardening and curating. So firstly, gardeners and curators work with existing material. They don't produce work out of nothing. So the gardener doesn't invent plants, they have to work with what can grow in a particular climate or soil, or even by the season. And the curator doesn't invent artworks, they select from what already exists. Secondly, both practices, gardening and curating, are defined as much by omission as they are by inclusion. So which plants or which works are left out can shape an entire garden or an exhibition. Thirdly, arrangement creates meaning. So consider a garden's spacing, its contrast, its density, and think about how that changes how each individual plant is perceived. Similarly, in an exhibition, how works are juxtaposed or sequenced can affect how each artwork is understood. So meaning doesn't just come from individual elements, it also comes from relations between elements. Fourthly, pruning is essential, even if you might not want to. So there are many gardeners who get upset when they have to cut back healthy growth, but it's required, it's essential. Curators might feel a bit disappointed when they have to exclude certain artworks from an exhibition, maybe really, really strong artworks, but they don't fit with the theme of the exhibition. Finally, taste and vision matter in both gardening and curating. So both practices can reflect conceptual and aesthetic sensibilities, but at the same time, imposing too much control, too much order can just take the life out of the exhibition or the garden. So they have a lot in common. Gardening and curating both shape what already exists, they arrange, they select, they prune. Neither creates from nothing, and both work with excess. And in both practices, they risk, with too much control, killing what is most alive. So let's think now about curating the self. And what's interesting is that Nietzsche does actually talk about the self in aesthetic terms. So in The Gay Science, he encourages us to give style to our character, to treat the self as a work of art. As we've already mentioned, this doesn't mean creating from scratch, creating from nothing. It means curating what is already there, our drives, our tendencies, our experiences. This is where the challenge lies. If we don't take that active role, if we don't try to give style to our character, we risk simply becoming the site where competing forces play out without any direction. As Nietzsche puts it, woe to the thinker who is not the gardener, but only the soil of plants that grow in him. So to give style to your character is to move from being the passive soil, where things just happen to you outside of your control, to being an active gardener who shapes, who nurtures, who cultivates. And this is where our encounters with art become really crucial. So in responding to art, we begin to select and to shape our drives, just like the gardener decides what they want to cultivate in the garden, how they want their garden to look, what they need to cut back. So once something in us is revealed, a desire or a discomfort, a fascination, we can choose to do something with it. We can choose to lean into it, we can choose to reject it, we can choose to reshape it. But Nietzsche warns us that not all forms of curation are equal. So we might be tempted to curate something that is very orderly and socially acceptable, to shape ourselves into something harmonious, something that is easily understood. But he thinks we need to avoid this temptation. To help us understand why, he introduces a crucial distinction, the Apollonian versus the Dionysian. Named after the two Greek gods, Apollo and Dionysus, Nietzsche uses these terms to describe two fundamentally different principles, two different ways of engaging with the world, with art, and ultimately with ourselves. Apollo, considered to be the most beautiful god, is the god of music and prophecy. And he represents harmony, clarity, order, and proportion. So the Apollonian is about shaping experience into something beautiful, into something intelligible. But of course, the world is not like that. So the Apollonian also involves illusion. Nietzsche does praise the Apollonian. He says that this is what makes life bearable. He says art alone is capable of turning those thoughts of disgust with the horror or absurdity of existence into representations with which one can live. And then we have Dionysus, who is a bit of a party god. So he is the god of intoxication, chaos, emotion, excess, ecstasy, and unity. The Dionysian is all about breaking boundaries. The raw, messy aspects of human life, this is where we get to if we engage with the Dionysian. So Nietzsche thinks this principle puts us in touch with the most fundamental, primal level of reality, where he suggests individuality totally disappears. Everything is one, just this big mess, big chaos. He thinks this is very important. So Nietzsche says, the saying yes to life, even in its strongest, strangest and hardest problems, this will to life, this is what I call Dionysian. So there is something very courageous about the Dionysian. It doesn't shy away from the ugly, the chaotic, the unpredictable. So the Apollonian and Dionysian, they are diametrically opposed, but they are both necessary. And Nietzsche thinks a lot of the time we end up leaning towards the Apollonian. And he cautions against this. He thinks that if you constantly want to sanitize, smooth over, redeem the world in some way, paper over what's difficult, what's chaotic, what's uncomfortable, that's not a good thing, because if you try to do that, you end up with illusion. And he thinks living in a world solely of illusions is no good. We want to avoid that. So if we turn this to the self, if we curate the self in an overly Apollonian way, we end up with a self that is not really representative, that's partial, that's overly controlled and ultimately false. We don't get to the real self. But engaging with the Dionysian, this might be uncomfortable, it might be confrontational, it might make you think about things you'd rather not think about. But this is a fundamental part of being human. He thinks this is necessary to engage with. And I want to suggest that art helps us to do this, and in this way art can be very revealing. So I want to look at a few examples of what we could call Apollonian artworks. So these are works which present the world in a way where it's very ordered and harmonious, and everything is resolved. There's nothing messy about the world. Botticelli. So in The Birth of Venus, we have an idealized beauty. We have an almost mythic calm. Everything is balanced, composed, harmonious, even the relation between the divine and the earthly. You have a sense of peace with this painting. There is nothing unsettling about it, chaotic about it. It's a sublime painting. Michelangelo's David. So David shows us an unattainable perfection here. We have flawless proportions. We have completely controlled form. What we don't see when we look at David is a body that consumes, that excretes, that malfunctions, that ages, that dies. Instead, we see the human body elevated to an aesthetic object. In Mondrian's composition with red, blue and yellow, he takes the Apollonian to the extreme. He distills reality to pure form. So Mondrian has taken the world in all of its diversity and reduced it to three primary colours, black lines and white, and that's it. That is the entire world according to Mondrian. Finally, Kusama's Infinity Rooms give us a highly controlled, highly repetitive, highly ordered structure that contains something which we would otherwise find totally overwhelming, the idea of infinity. So the effect of the Apollonian in art is to create a sense of structure, stability, security. In other words, it's to soothe us. But if we look at examples of Dionysian artworks, these works do the exact opposite. They don't try to resolve anything. There's nothing harmonious about them. They are concerned with exposing the world, bringing us face to face with what we might find really difficult, really uncomfortable, unsettling. And how we respond to those types of works, that's indicative of the self. That's indicative of certain feelings we have, certain desires, certain neuroses. And so the Dionysian is crucial in telling us what we are like. Okay, so we will look at some examples of Dionysian artworks now. Frida Kahlo, the two Fridas. So think about how this painting makes you feel. Maybe you feel touched by this image of two women seated quietly, holding hands. What might that tell you? Well, maybe that tells you something about your own experience of maybe feeling divided. Maybe that's empathy coming out. Maybe that's telling you that, yes, I can see how the self might split in two and how that can be hard to contain. Maybe you find this totally unsettling, the exposed hearts, the blood, the lifelines. What does that tell you? Is that because you can't bear not to be a unified, coherent self? In Bacon's Man Kneeling in Grass, we see this crouched figure, looking quite vulnerable, exposed, moving in this unsettling way, moving on all fours. Here, Bacon really successfully blurs the boundary between human and beast. And if this worries you, what does this tell you? Maybe it tells you something about your own attitude towards our animality. The more we insist on seeing ourselves as these rational beings, superior to other animals, the more disturbing we might find this image. With Bosch, this overwhelming, strange, deeply strange, surreal world. How does that make you feel? If you feel disorientated, if you feel confused, maybe that's telling you that clarity matters for you. Maybe this is telling you that you need the world to make sense. You want this to be grounded in the concrete, in the real, not the fantastical. Finally, Goya's black paintings. I'm going to look at 3 of them. So these black paintings present us with otherworldly images. They are notoriously difficult to interpret. We're not really quite sure what he meant by them. I think these are great examples of the Dionysian. So here we have a dog peering out from the abyss. How does this make you feel? You might feel a sense of dread looking at this. What's going to happen to this poor little dog on its own? No one to guide it, to look after it. You might feel existential loneliness. Or maybe this painting has a completely opposite effect on you. Maybe it makes you feel quite calm. What does that tell you? Maybe you have a different relationship with uncertainty. Maybe you're okay with that. Maybe the dog is going on an adventure. Maybe this represents freedom to you. In The Witch's Sabbath, we have this amazing image, grotesque figures crowded around this humanoid billy goat figure. And they are listening to this devilish sermon. So you might feel quite uneasy looking at this. Or maybe you're fascinated, maybe this draws you in. What could this tell you about your own feelings on irrationality, on groupthink, on hysteria? What is he saying to them? Why are they buying into this so readily? Finally, Saturn devouring his own son. You can see from his eyes that he is shocked by his own monstrosity here. This is, without doubt, a monstrous image. And your reaction can certainly come from just the story, from what Saturn is actually doing, why he's doing it. But there might be an aspect to your reaction where you're horrified by this because actually it's not totally alien. There's something in it that is not totally alien. Maybe your reaction speaks to your fear of losing control, of becoming overly possessive, of becoming destructive. So our reactions to these artworks can be revealing. They can tell us something about what we are made of, what's driving us, things that maybe you don't think about in your normal day-to-day life. But engaging with difficult artworks like these can tell you what maybe you need to cultivate, what you might need to prune, what you might need to reshape. Of course, not all artworks are going to sit so neatly on either side of the Apollonian, the Dionysian. There will be artworks which exist in tension between those two principles. And I think Cecily Brown's paintings are a very good example of this. So looking at the pajama game, at first glance, this might seem really chaotic, all over the place. Figures seem to appear, disappear. Are we looking at bodies? Are we looking at brush strokes? It's not obvious what's going on. This painting has a real energy to it. We do get a sense of the Dionysian, this state of excess, sensuality, instability. But at the same time, the Apollonian is present too. So there is control in the use of colour. There is a rhythm in this painting. She's thought about the density of the marks. There is control in this painting. So this is why her work is very interesting, because there's ambiguity in it, and it might tell you something about your own responses to ambiguity. So are you looking at this trying to fix or resolve this image? Are you trying to make sense of it, trying to say, okay, well, there's a figure there, this looks like a face, there's a leg there, there's another face there. Are you trying to fix this image? Or are you just okay with not knowing what you're looking at? Are you fine with this ambiguity? So perhaps the goal isn't to choose between the Apollonian and the Dionysian, but to hold them in tension and to sustain that and to be okay with it. So if we return to this idea of curating the self, this is clearly not just a philosophical idea anymore. It's a practice. It's something that people do every day on social media. And one problem with social media is that it does encourage us to operate in an overwhelmingly Apollonian mode. So we curate towards perfection, towards order, coherence. But we're not really like that. This runs the risk of completely flattening your inner life. So what social media rewards is not just beauty or success. It seems to reward this idea of a self that is easily understood, a self that is readable. So if you think about platforms like Instagram, TikTok, whatever people might use, there is a pressure to present a coherent self, a self that can be easily understood, that you can just quickly glance at and say, okay, yeah, I know what this person's about. Social media likes to peddle talk of authenticity. So we have a great example here. Be you. Be the real you. Be the genuine you. Be the authentic you. But the irony is, of course, everything is heavily edited. Everything is filtered. This whole enterprise is concerned with the superficial, with presenting a very polished version of yourself. And you are constantly thinking about the gaze of the other. How will this be received? Every time you post something, what will other people think of this? How does the other see this? So we curate in social media in line with the Apollonian. We are focused on appearance, on illusion, and we edit out the mess. We don't want anyone to see that. So what's striking is that this kind of curation that we see on social media doesn't lead to self-knowledge. What happens instead is that we just get trapped in our own fakery. We've built this version of ourselves. It's not really you. You present as this. You engage with the world with this version of you, almost like an avatar, and you end up alienated from yourself. Puts us in a very, very strange position where the self becomes something that we just perform rather than something that we live in, that we actually encounter. But the Dionysian interrupts that process. It forces us to confront what we would prefer to exclude or not think about or gloss over. But if we don't engage with the Dionysian, we don't really know ourselves. We don't know what's growing in the garden. And if we don't know what's growing, we can't cultivate it. So, thinking about where we are today, we've got a lovely exhibition space out there. It's very easy to fall into the same habits that we find in social media use, to look at things very quickly, just to glance, to categorize, to decide almost instantly whether you like something or whether you understand something. But that instinct, that's what's been drilled into us through social media. Gravitating towards artworks that you immediately understand, that you immediately like or agree with, might feel comfortable, but it does mean that you're only engaging with quite a narrow view of yourself. You're not really learning anything about yourself. So, how about staying a bit longer with the works that you don't like or that make you feel uncomfortable? Or even the works that bore you. Boredom can be very revealing. So we easily dismiss things. In seconds, we can dismiss something, say, no, that's boring, it's not interesting. What's going on there? Is it really the work that's uninteresting, or is there something in you that doesn't want to engage? So the works that you avoid might be the most important works for you. So maybe a shift is in order. When you're looking at art, instead of asking, do I like this artwork? Ask, what is this showing me about myself? Looking at art is a really valuable enterprise because it allows us to come face to face with all the messy bits of being human, all the bits that social media relentlessly erases. And we need that confrontation. If we don't do that, we move so far away from ourselves. We end up trapped in illusion, trapped in fakery. And we cannot really cultivate ourselves. So we know that looking at art is great for many reasons. We know that it lowers stress hormones. We know that it helps with focus and attention. It promotes empathy. It fosters connection. And good art does all of that. But great art shows you yourself. Thank you. Do we have time for questions? What do we think? I don't know. Okay. If anyone has any questions, I'd love to hear them, or comments, or thoughts.
I just have a comment.
Mm.
I'm now looking back at pieces of art that I have seen and thinking, what did that tell me about myself? Because I didn't really think about it from that point of view.
Okay.
There's this specific piece that I'm thinking about. It's very colourful and it does make me happy when I see it. But I don't wear colour.
Oh, interesting.
I'm pretty much always in blue, well, denim and black.
Okay.
Like, why is it that
Yeah.
gives me so much joy, yet I don't choose to wear colour? If I can have that feeling with me just every day, wearing just a simple colourful top.
That's so interesting. What do you have any hypotheses on why you don't allow yourself to indulge in that?
Like I like the easy dressing. I don't want it to take time to, I like to be safe when I dress, and I want to know this outfit's gonna work.
Okay.
That comes up that day.
Okay,
I don't
interesting.
want to feel underdressed or overdressed, so I always go for a safe color, maybe.
So colours, risky, fun but risky,
Yes.
joyful but risky.
Absolutely.
That's very interesting. Very interesting. Yeah, I think what we choose to wear is obviously a form of self-curation. We can think of it as a form of art as well, and what you choose to engage with, what you don't choose to engage with could tell you something about yourself there. Yeah.
I'm just wondering, I was at the previous lecture, so I'm a bit under the influence of the previous approach.
Okay.
Which was, what is art for? I was wondering, do you think that the artists, intends to have us wondering about who we are when they produce this art? And what do you think was Goya's intention when he produced all these dark pictures? Was he trying to make a social statement? Was he just, doing something without any purpose? Was he thinking of us looking at it?
To your first question, no, I'm sure lots of artists don't think that's the aim of their artworks. And I certainly wouldn't want to say this is the sole way to understand how we look at art and what art is about. But I do think it's an angle. And I think it's an interesting way to approach going into a gallery or an exhibition and thinking about the artworks in a slightly different way. Goya, so the black paintings, we know so little about them, and it seems like he didn't intend for anyone to see them because they were just painted on the walls of his house. So they are in the Prado now, but someone had to scrape them off the walls, transfer them onto canvas. So these are not works that he intended to exhibit. So that question of what did he want from the viewer, who knows? Did he really want any viewers, or did he think of himself as the viewer as well as the creator? Yeah, I think that is a very difficult question. What do you think?
I have a theory a bit about this, because when you look at all of Goya, like his earlier periods, they're very Apollonian, I would say, in nature, like very, and I think the more you try to brush, the things that disturb under the carpet, the darker they come out in the end. And I think Goya found balance that way.
Yeah, I think he's fascinating because there does seem to be this shift from the more Apollonian works to the more Dionysian. If you think about the works focused on witchcraft, for instance, and the supernatural, there does seem to be some engagement with that loss of control and otherworldliness. And does he strike a balance? Maybe. Just to go back to the black paintings, do you think we can have the Apollonian here as well?
This one maybe not the other one.
So there's more of a balance here, but difficult to find a balance with this one.
For me.
Okay.
For me. Yeah.
Do you think there's a balance there? Can you see a balance?
Well, this one seems to just speak of a total loss of control. All of the boundaries have been dissolved here. I think the most I would be able to say about the Apollonian here is that obviously Goya has made stylistic choices in terms of the form rather than the content. So he's obviously decided on a certain palette. So there's some order there, but this painting to me does seem heavily Dionysian. And also just how it reaches you as well. It's extremely confrontational. It's not exactly pleasant to look at. People are still shocked by this when they first see it. Yeah, this is the Dionysian for me, I have to say.
There is structure to it.
There's structure. There's structure. But only to hold the Dionysian, I think, rather than showcase the Apollonian. But that's just my view on it, I think. Yes.
Are there any artists that Nietzsche has written about that specifically spoke to him, that he got something out of? Is there any, has he done any sort of case studies that he's recorded, that he is, you know, has he put this in practice on himself?
That's a good question. So he focused more on music rather than visual art. So I've sort of taken his ideas and run with them and transferred them into the context of visual art. But he thought music was this unique vessel for blending the Apollonian and the Dionysian. And there are certain composers that he, had a sort of complicated attitude towards Wagner, started out really liking Wagner and then hated him towards the end. He also thinks about literature as an arena for the Apollonian and Dionysian. So in terms of visual artists, I don't have good examples for you. It's mostly music and some literature. Yeah. Yes.
When you were talking about the Apollonian versus Dionysian,
Yeah.
You didn't quite say it, but I was thinking, is it the Dionysian is necessary to move things forward? That really is going away from what's safe and comforting to exploring other realms, other feelings, other emotions. And then when I was thinking about this, when you were saying, and I was thinking about music, right, with musicians kind of letting go and going very alternative, moving in new directions, and artists as well, visual artists as such, doing that. But could you push boundaries on the other side with the Apollonian as well? And actually, maybe Mondrian is an example of that. But
Yeah. Oh, lots of great points there. I think. Okay. So your first point. Yes, I think absolutely the Dionysian is needed for progress, because there's something quite stultifying about the Apollonian. It's all sort of this nice illusion, and we could stick with that and be happy, be content, but you don't really know the reality. You've just got this plaster over it. So I think the Dionysian engagement with that is needed in order to push through that. I think one helpful parallel might be thinking about psychoanalysis and therapy, and how actually you have to look at the uncomfortable and the ugly and the stuff you want to ignore in order to make progress. The alternative to that is just living with this nice illusory narrative that you've created for yourself, and it's comfortable, but you're not really going to move forward with it. The second point about can the Apollonian progress in that way? Well, yeah, I mean, Mondrian created a whole new language. In music, we obviously get different movements, genres, we get people breaking boundaries there, even though I'm thinking of classical music here in particular, just in the history of that, they are obviously working within quite tight constraints, but there's still progress. So I think that's very interesting. Yeah, I think it's possible to progress with the Apollonian. maybe it's a bit more difficult. Yeah, there's very interesting points there. Thank you. Okay, I think we're all ready for a drink now, aren't we? Enough of looking at Saturn devouring his son. Yeah, I left the worst image up for you. Thank you for your question. Thank you.
Looks very cute. Oh, thank you very much.